I make video works with this new technology, but I've always been an artist ever since I was a boy. I was the class artist in grade school, and I did all the bulletin boards for the holidays, you know, the drawings for all the different holidays, and I did the scenery in the school play. But I didn't discover video until I was in university, beginning in college. That was 1969, and this technology was really brand new, and it had just come out, and I was so captivated by it. You know, it was like my whole childhood of growing up in the television age was right there, and I could do it. I could touch it and make it, and I've just been working with it ever since. But I always knew I was going to be an artist. I grew up in New York City and in Queens, and I went to school, university up in upstate New York at Syracuse. So I was always basically in the New York area, and you know, there's a lot of energy and activity there too. It was a great place to grow up, and in those days when I was young, we had 7 channels on television, you know, which at that time in the late 50s, early 60s, in many parts of the country, smaller towns actually only had 2 or 3 channels. So I, you know, grew up in this kind of media world right from the beginning. If I look back and think about what inspired me when I was starting out, of course, I would have to say television and the movies. I mean, you know, I grew up in the 1950s. They're pretty powerful cultural forces, those 2 media. So by the time I was a kid, you know, I was in end of grade school, you had already seen a number of films, and you sort of, you know, ingest like editing and cutting and, you know, structuring time, and you absorb it when you're young. So when I was given a camera for the first time, I sort of knew what to do, which is a problem. You have to get beyond that. You know, you can't give a young person a camera today because without also making sure that they're retraining and questioning everything that they've seen up until that point, because that's going to influence them and how they make something. So you won't really break through into some new space that way. So I, you know, saw a lot of TV and the movies. I also was aware of some artists who had started working with video in the 1960s, which is when it started. The main figure is a person by the name of Namjoon Paik. He's Korean, and he did the earliest video works in the early 1960s, modifying TV sets and things like that. And I actually assisted him on some of his exhibitions when I was in college. So I had an awareness that there was a path there, someone was doing something there. It wasn't like it was all new. Artists were beginning to touch it and use it, Bruce Nauman, other people like that. So I sort of had a few models, but they didn't have that much more experience than I did as a student. It was really a beautiful moment, sort of like a little bit like the internet of a few years ago, where it's just beginning to happen, and you realize no matter what age you are, no one could have been using it for more than a few years, you know, and it had that energy of newness to it. And it was also at a pretty interesting cultural time, the late 60s. I mean, the world was changing, literally. And a whole generation, in fact, was feeling empowered because of their awareness of what was going on at that moment and a sense of the future. That the future was positive. The future was better. We could move to something better by changing the problems that exist today. So there was this incredible movement forward. Technology was part of that movement. And the video camera, the first portable cameras that came out in 68, 69, were a great revolution technologically. And so that's what I grabbed onto. So we did have a sense of that this was unprecedented and new and important. But on the other hand, when I look back on it, it seemed like the natural thing to do. I mean, it was just in front of you. You just didn't even think about it. There was no choice to do anything else. It was so clear. Not just myself, there's a whole cross-section of people who felt that way. And so now when I show in big museums like this, and it's a historical show, and there's 25-year-old works in it, and you're talking to students who are 21 years old and they weren't even born when you made your first video, you know, it's a different world, but it seems in a way more amazing that I was doing it so early, but I tell you at the time, it just seemed very natural, and it seemed like the right thing to do. I made my first real tape that I'd say was mine in 1972, and in fact that work is in the exhibition here. And it's a self-portrait. I'm looking at myself reflected in a mirror, and in front of that mirror a video camera is looking at me. And the camera has a monitor under it which you don't see, but I'm looking at, so I'm looking at my self-image in a mirror and in a monitor screen. And I'm staring straight ahead for about 8 minutes. And then finally at the end, I can't hold it any longer, and I just scream as loud as I can. And that's the end of the tape. It was called Tape I. It was made in 1972 when I was 21. The way I see it, there's two ways to work. And they're not disconnected. They're part of the same larger whole. One of them is when you get the whole idea. Just pops into your mind and you see something in its entirety. And then you go to make it. You've got to make this thing, but you have the whole thing. You've been given the whole thing. And that's more rare. It has happened to me sometimes. And then the other side to that, flip side, is when you just get a glimpse of something, you know, it's like there's a curtain and it just opens up a little crack and then closes again, and you saw something in there and you go, aha, that's pretty interesting. You know, but then you can't get there because it's closed again. So then you have to find little openings, and little by little you get a part here and a part here and a fragment here and a fragment there, and you start putting these things together, and little by little something happens. You know, so those two things are, one way you're sort of like feeling your way through something, and the other one it's like a total flash. And then your work after that is to just assemble that, to make that vision. You know, so those two areas, they're related very much to one of the fundamental physical ways that we create things, is also in these two general categories. One is start from nothing, take elements, put them up, blocks or whatever, and you make something that wasn't there. The other way to work is you start with a block and you subtract, you cut away, take things away, and then you're left with something. So both of them arrive at the same place, but they start from different directions. The video camera is a peculiar instrument. It records sound and light, and it preserves it on magnetic tape. And so you get an image and a sound that is very similar to what you see with your eyes and hear with your ears. Although, of course, it's electronic, it's not the same. But it's close enough where you begin to think that this thing is capturing experience in some way. It took me the longest time to realize that when I opened up the lens on my video camera and recorded what was out there, people, trees, buildings, you know, landscape, that I wasn't really dealing with images of the outside world. That I was really dealing with images of the inside world. Even though this is an optical electronic instrument, but at the same time, once it captures those things, it brings them in the same way that we hold memories of our experience in ourselves at all time. You can only experiencing one thing at one moment. You record that on video, once you play that back, it's a different moment. You're not there anymore. You're very often indoors and you're looking at it on a funny little screen. And it's not the tree. And that's beautiful. That's really profound. And it's not that it makes it less real or somehow a pale reflection of reality. I don't think of it that way. It's something new. It's not quite real, but it's not unreal, the way your memory works. And so I'd say if anything, what I work with, it's that tension between what's in ourselves, the space we inhabit internally, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and this physical world that's around us. Yeah, the camera eye goes all over the world in my work, but it also goes inside a drop of water, which is a natural part of our world. But it's a little, see, the world is filled with secrets, and they're all there. You just don't notice them. So when it rains, every drop of water that comes down has a little image of the world in it. And it's not something that, you know, is some kind of fantasy that Walt Disney created. This is real, you know. And so you just don't notice things because we're kind of narrowly focused in general in our life. And the whole work to do, which is true not only for art but for all spiritual traditions, is how to open up that focus. So, because it's always wanting to narrow you down. So how do you open that up? I found these cameras and recorders and things are really excellent tools for opening that up, because you can take a lens, a special lens, and you can look inside that drop of water, and if you get close enough in there, you see the whole world, you know? There's no message. Although I have my own meanings and I have my own ideas and core concepts I'm working with in each piece, and you can extract that and feel that. But I'd have to say, in a very general way, it's really about expanding awareness. So there are just, you know, because all works of art, even though we use the term visual art, and we also use the term art objects, all works of art represent invisible things. They don't really deal with things from the physical world. That's just the way to channel something, to focus something. But really what they're talking about is something that's not in here right now. It's something that you normally can't see. And that's why they're so startling and amazing and treasured. Because they are physical objects that are working in a very different way than that lamp stand over there or that chair. You know, there's something else going on in there. know, being an artist, I think, is extremely dangerous for one to think about the reactions to your work. I mean, that's really in the domain of Hollywood and television. I mean, that's what those guys think about all the time, how to increase market share, how to get the most viewers. And that, to me, is so utterly wrong. If you're really interested in making something that's going to last, if you're interested in making something that's going to be a quick flash and bring you something right away, that's fine. But if you really want to make something that's going to last the way the great images on the halls in our museums around the world are, then you don't come from that way at all. You come from a completely different way, which basically says that an idea, following an idea on its own terms, not on some hypothetical viewer's terms, will get you to a really profound place. And that is precisely the breath of life that would be put into the work that someone else on the other side is going to sense and feel, some depth, something unknown or hidden, that someone else is going to feel as you felt it when you had that question and motivation to do something. And that little spark gets passed on. And so, in that way of looking at things, the creative object, the thing that's made, creates its own audience. It's not the other way around. And so it will attract people the way a magnet attracts metal filings, you know, just because of its inner life, you know. And that's why I never think about people looking at this stuff. If I do occasionally, I might imagine one viewer, not a whole society, one person, because the other beautiful thing about art is it's you and it. It's one-to-one. That's the beautiful thing about it. So it's really an ultimate audience of one, which, if you're an artist, is in way a kind of a strange reflection of yourself too. So it's a very complicated thing. Artists have always been at the threshold between the physical and the metaphysical, the real and the imaginary. You know, they're at that turning point where what drives an artist to make something, whether they're conceptual artist, political artist, you know, a purely visual artist, musician, is to work through the form, create a form that you, i.e. not the artist, that anybody else can perceive, can feel, can touch, can taste, can smell, can hear. So how to do that, to take a very private experience or an idea and channel it through something that's objectified in some way, that goes out there, that everybody can be aware of, can sense. That's why, you know, the ancient Greek term for the word aesthetics, which comes from the ancient Greek, has to do with, in ancient Greek, with sensory perception. It's about sensory perception. So it's an awareness or an acknowledgement that it's going to come into you through your senses somehow. And that's sort of what we do. This medium is really extraordinary and unprecedented in art history. It hasn't been since the Renaissance that artists have been able to reach the public in the vernacular common language of the day. In that day, it was a Christian message delivered literally on the walls of the church and public spaces. And today, it's the ability to get something out on the internet, to get something on television, get something on videotape into a videotape shop. They're selling my tapes here in the bookstore. These are not reproductions. The work itself is video. These are video copies right from the master tape in the same form. They are not photographs of paintings. It would be like if you had the painting. Of course, I can make any number of copies of them. It's not like a unique object, but it's pretty exciting. You know, that where else could you go to see an art show and literally go to the bookstore and for a very nominal amount of money buy one of the works from the show? You know, that's pretty amazing. So this medium is quite extraordinary in that way. And now with the internet, there are even more possibilities. Doing a big exhibition like this over 25 years is very strange. In a way, these are my kids. It's my family. And you know how weird it gets with your family sometimes. Like, you know more about them too much sometimes. So the fact that I made every one of these things, and I made them at all different times in my life, you know, I can't say really what my favorite one is. It varies, you know, and what I think the best one is, or the most complete. They all have a little certain degree of failure in them, and I kind of like that. Because if anything, I think if I ever made anything that was totally complete, there's no reason to go on living. You know, our incompleteness is the reason why we are here. That's why there are males and females on the work. They're half. They're not whole. And that's why if you're making work, the reason to do the next piece is some unresolved question in the work you just finished. And that propels you forward. So when I look at all of these things, I see, you know, I'm very proud of them. I'm kind of amazed sometimes that I did all of this work. I can't believe it myself. But on the other hand, I look at them and I see flaws here and there, or just little things that I didn't quite get, and that makes me want to do the next one. I just finished this exhibition of 25 years of my work, and I'm thinking, well, I probably have about 25 years to go, so what am I going to do? Well, I think the first thing I'll do is try to forget the last 25 years, because the strange thing about this exhibition is it puts your own 25 years right in front of your face, and I do this, you know, 2-3 times a year on this tour. I have to look at all these pieces that I made in very different places and mindsets in my life. So it's interesting to see them all together, and they change over time too, which is kind of neat. But I just want to forget about it right now. You know, I want to like a blank slate. I want to, you know, because there's no such thing as a blank slate. I mean, forgetting is the most important skill we have, in the sense that when you wipe the slate clean, you might have a blank canvas in front of you, but you're still you. And this is full. That's never blank. So whatever mark you make, whatever shape you draw, whatever sound you utter, is you and no one else. And it has all of your past and your future and your dreams and your thoughts and your doubts in it. And you just have to make sure that your skill, your craft is good enough that you can sort of get out of the way when it comes. And so that's what I mean when I say I want to forget all of this stuff. So I want to like forget about this so I can remember it and go on.